One local conservation tool that has generated controversy over the last decade since it's been introduced and has since led to repeated calls for better, clearer regulation is Koh Tao's mooring line program. Mooring lines are an important tool for regulating use of the reef for a number of stakeholders, whose main concerns with the program stem from the themes often seen in cases of common pool resource use, including economic impact, cost and maintenance, accountability, and of course, enforcement. From a conservation standpoint, these permanent mooring structures reduce or completely eliminate anchor dropping. A single dropped anchor can damage hundreds of years of coral growth on a reef, which can take centuries to recover, and destroy valuable reef habitat in the meantime. From a fishing standpoint, properly managed mooring lines can reduce competition and ensure larger takes from a single reef over time by protecting the population from overfishing caused by unregulated practice. And then there's the local economy. Dive operators, who bring in millions of baht to the island annually, rely on the mooring lines to ensure the safety of their scuba divers and snorkelers. The lines also help to maintain an undamaged reef full of marine life, which is ultimately what the local industry promises incoming tourists. But in an area with such a policy vacuum like Koh Tao, with its thousands of square meters of largely unregulated reef, cooperation among these stakeholders is incredibly challenging, even given the presumption that everyone would benefit from the active maintenance of such a mooring line program. Plus, the commercial value of the area's reefs, plus the enormous influx of tourists to nearby locations, means that Koh Tao waters attract companies from areas like Koh Samui, Koh Phangan, and mainland Champon, and many of these operators either don't know or just don't respect the conditional use of our mooring systems. After years of requests from the local community, the Thai Department of Marine and Coastal Resources responded to the urging of one particularly vocal group called the New Heaven Reef Conservation Program back in 2000. First, to satisfy some stakeholders, the DMCR launched a particularly locally contentious program to deploy a number of artificial reef sites specifically used for fishing. They then paid for a shipment of mooring balls of 3 different colors and the rope required, and provided training for RCP to undertake installation. The lines were installed across roughly 3 dozen reefs, orange for the exclusive use of dive boats, blue for private charters, and white for small boats. It then took years of trial and error to define the mooring program's specific policies. Today, according to officials, those are that no fishing boats are permitted with 100 meters of a diving buoy, and no more than 2 diving boats are permitted per single orange buoy. As is typical in most attempted marine regulation, enforcement is spotty and underwhelming at best. One of the main stakeholder groups impacted are fishermen. Thailand is the world's 3rd largest seafood exporter at $7 billion per year, and unregulated fishing runs rampant across its waters. The ocean is notoriously difficult to police, but the Thai industry has proven to be especially difficult to regulate. One of the reasons for this is studied at length by environmental justice groups, and that involves the Thai industry's ties to human trafficking and slave labor practices, particularly among Burmese and Cambodian refugees and migrants. This means that these operations work extra hard to really stay under the government's radar. Now, regulating fishing practices on affluent reefs like the ones around Koh Tao has always been quite combative, and in the past has even elevated to instances of violence. I spoke to one dive instructor who said that as recently as 2005, which was just a few years after the mooring lines were installed, she was diving with students and a fishing boat dropped a net near the dive site. Now, this is not altogether uncommon, so she took out her knife and cut the net to keep it from entangling on the reef or endangering her students. And then as she surfaced, she had a spear gun pointed at her from the fishing vessel. Now, these acts of cowboy territorial violence don't really occur anymore, at least not on Koh Tao, but it does demonstrate just how important these resources are to a number of different stakeholders. Now, around that time, quality camera phones were becoming more ubiquitous, and so the DMCR issued a call among all dive centers to submit photos of illegal fishing operations and actually sent out teams to patrol the area and question vessels who were identified through photos. It wasn't the most perfect operation, of course, but the ships that were most likely operating illegally and likely the ones causing issues in the first place learned quite quickly to avoid the dive sites under this initiative to cause extra surveillance on their own operation. However, this still did marginalize the legal fishing operations whose livelihoods depended on these abundant reefs and have so for generations before the diving industry even arrived. So in an effort to look out for these fishing interests, the DMCR initiated the sinking of hundreds of concrete blocks to act as mini reefs just off the natural pinnacles and dive sites. The idea behind such a project is to spread out fish populations, bringing life into areas where the fishermen can then fish and use nets without the risk of them tangling on or destroying the natural reef, or, of course, endangering scuba divers. Now, this initiative actually did satisfy many of the dive operators, but caused an enormous uproar among the conservation community and actually didn't really meet the needs of the fishing community, who were continually visiting the reefs each and every day. Now, traditionally, reef blocks deployed in conjunction with respected designation of marine reserves have empirically shown to maintain stocks of commercially important species above their target levels. But this finding is largely theoretical, as few, if any, marine reserves exist where everybody does follow the rules. So this thinning the herd model may make sense in theory, but conservationists argue that without the subsequent enforcements of regulations like no take of endangered or threatened species, catch limits, and other mandates, such a program may only serve to threaten the abundance of marine life more quickly. Plus, the fishermen get around this anyway. While the community continued to submit photos of badly behaving fishing vessels to the DMCR, follow-ups became more and more rare. And today, each morning, as my dive company's boat approaches sites around 7 a.m., we're almost always finding vessels untying from the dive site and circling to reattach when we leave. Then what we encounter underwater is often a pinnacle emptied of fish life, nets blanketing the reef, trapping fish, sharks, and turtles, and without its removal would ultimately kill the coral as well. Some sites it's gotten so rampant, my eco-trust team has been trying for months to establish a baseline of a clean reef in order to try and track the arrival of new nets, but we're continually arriving each day to find more. The dive centers are by no means fully cooperative either. While everybody was more than happy to have mooring lines installed over a decade ago, presumably ending the battle between fishing vessels and dive companies and reducing the risk associated with anchor dropping, accountability has been a very ongoing issue. Koh Tao is a small 21 square kilometer island with more than 70 dive centers, all trying to cooperate among one another on just a few dozen reefs. While our official policy says that no more than 2 dive boats may be on one mooring, Especially during high season, it's common to see upwards of 6 or 7 tugging on a single buoy. Add a bit of inclement weather, and each year dozens of these lines are snapping, which then just puts pressure on the other ones as dive centers continue their operations. But of course, no one wants to pay to have the mooring line system maintained. And it's very difficult for the island to ask for more capacity from the government because there's such a large number of dive centers that are actually operating illegally. And the DMCR budget is only going to capture the official diving pressure that's reported and not really the reality of what's going on. There's just not a huge pressure to even legitimize these dive centers either because of the culture of bribes paid in lieu of taxes and just the simple fact the government is more than happy to overlook the activity because of the billions of baht in revenue these centers collectively bring the region each year. That said, the DMCR has established a much greater presence on Koh Tao in the last few months, and we might even be getting a local office soon. This presence is highly encouraging, focusing mainly on hot-button issues like Thailand's enormous ocean trash problem, with the DMCR leading efforts to promote comprehensive education, waste reduction, and banning cigarettes on the beaches. Not to mention, we are finally getting the steady removal of Koh Tao's trash mountain problem underway. These programs are not in vain either. Just this month, Koh Tao became the first place in Thailand with a fully plastic bag-free 7-Eleven, which was a big moment for our local community. It's one thing to have Western businesses lead the charge in plastic reduction, but it's an even more powerful thing to have the local Thais take the reins. At present, however, the mooring line program still falls on a very small group of volunteers to maintain it and circulate updates among the community. Calls for an official dive center tax or annual contribution for maintenance have been floated, but even getting these shop owners together to attend such meetings has been a challenge. So a community hope is that this active DMCR presence influences the debate and brings with it more concrete enforced policies to regulate the use of our reefs without fully marginalizing any of the several stakeholders.